Welcome to the Bloom Where You're Planted podcast from Never Too Late Cafe. I'm your host, Laura Womack. Each week, we sit down for a chat with someone just like you, someone who had an idea, a passion, a dream, or sometimes just a thought, and planted that seed, watched it grow into something they wanted to share with the world. If you have an idea for a topic or someone that would be a guest for the Bloom Where You're Planted podcast, feel free to reach out to us on Facebook, or you can join our Never Too Late Cafe Facebook group. We'd love to hear from you. I have a special guest with me today, and I'll let him introduce himself and tell you where he's currently living.
Yes, my name is Dr. John Lorentz. I'm a professor emeritus at Shawnee State University in Portsmouth, Ohio. And I've had an academic career of 38 and a half years, both in teaching and administering at the university level. My particular field is history, with a specialty in the Middle East, in particular Iran and Afghanistan, which is what my publications are academically, and that includes a book on Iran called the Historical Dictionary of Iran, actually two, and a paperback book called The A to Z of Iran. Even though I'm an academic, my interests have been quite eclectic. That's actually reflected in my academic career as well, in that over all those years, I actually taught in 11 different departments, mostly in history, but in a number of other departments, including language. For 17 years, in fact, half of my teaching load was in Farsi, that is teaching the language of the country of Iran, called Farsi. Most people in this country know the language by the name of Persian.
Oh, okay.
And then I did a lot of work in translation as well, both orally and written, because I'm fluent in Farsi in writing, reading, and speaking.
So how did it come about that you were so interested in that part of the country that you learned the language and you've written and taught? How did it start for you?
A good question, but with a long answer. It actually all began my junior year in college, where I was attending Miami University, and I did a junior year abroad at the American University of Beirut in Beirut, Lebanon. And at the time, I was majoring in mathematics, and I'm sitting in a classroom in Beirut. First week in AUB, or American University of Beirut, is on this bluff overlooking the Mediterranean Sea with palm trees, this beautiful Mediterranean climate. And I'm sitting in a math class, and a math professor is droning on the board with math formulas, and I'm looking out the window, and I can't concentrate, and telling myself, this is crazy. I came halfway around the world, and I'm taking a class I could be taking any place, a basement in St. Louis or any place. It doesn't make any sense. And so after that class, I ran over to the registrar's office and dropped my math classes and picked up anything I could get on the Middle East. The Arabic language, at that time, as Lebanon was an Arab country, and history, politics, anthropology, sociology, anything I could get relating to the Middle East. By the end of that year, I wanted to actually change fields. I came back to Miami expecting to change my major, and at that time, this was many years ago, half a century ago. Um, there was not one single course in the university relating to anything on the Middle East in any subject. That's no longer the case, but at that time it was. And so I had to make a decision. I ended up actually graduating with a BA in psychology. And I was actually had been awarded a fellowship to do graduate work in psychology at Ohio State. But fate sort of intervened because one of the things that happened while I was in Beirut were the debates between John Kennedy and Richard Nixon in anticipation of the election of that year. And I was actually taken by the charisma of John Kennedy. So in some ways, in many ways, he's sort of responsible for my career. And I had decided that because one of the things that he and later talked about, I was aware of, was creating this new entity called the Peace Corps. That happened. It had been created just prior to my return. And I decided that that's something I wanted to be a part of. So I was one of the very first applications.
Wow.
Country into the Peace Corps. I was actually invited to come to one of the very first groups, but this was kind of now in the middle of my senior year at school, and I wanted to go to the Middle East, and neither of the groups that I was invited for was work to the Middle East. So I called the Peace Corps and said, well, do you have anything coming up in the Middle East? And the answer was no, there's nothing even being talked about at the moment. So there I was in the midst of my senior year having to decide what to do, and I ended up moving ahead and as I got this fellowship to Ohio State. Well, lo and behold, the day before I graduated, I got a telegram. This was back in the days when the telegrams were still delivered by the boys riding, bicycles up in their Western Union uniforms, and the telegrams were on those teletype yellow envelopes and pasted teletype. And the telegram said, "Congratulations, you're invited to come to the first Peace Corps group to the Middle East, and it will be to Iran." So, and I said, "Call this number." So I did, and I said, "Well, no, actually, I wanted to go to an Arab country because I'd already studied some Arabic and I had this year's experience in the Arab world, and Iran is not an Arab country." So so I called and said, "Well, you have anything going to an Arab country?" And they said, "No." I said, "How long do I have to decide?" And they said, 3 days. Because you're going into training 10 days from today. So you've got 3 days to decide and then a week to get ready to come out to Utah State University for training, language training and other training relating to the Peace Corps. So which is like a 10-week training period. And so I had a decision to make, and consulted as many people as I could, and was unanimously, I was told, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, because nobody at that time had any idea what sort of impact the Peace Corps might have, or what, was there really, a good stepping stone. And
it was too new at that point.
It was brand new, absolutely brand new. I mean, it was pioneering. So that was the toughest decision I think one of the toughest decisions I've ever had to make. But against the advice of family and friends, I basically went with my heart and decided to do it. So off I went in the Peace Corps. Went to training that summer, and fall I'm in Iran for 2 years. And I was sent out to a rural area in Iran where nobody spoke any English, except the principal of this rural school where I was assigned. And that was that was a difficult sort of thrown into total immersion. We had 10 weeks of language training, which was enough to not starve to death. At least you could get by basically, but with this sort of total immersion, it didn't take all that long before I felt comfortable. And in 2 years, I was quite fluent in spoken Persian. That was actually sort of quite fortunate, because it's probably that more than anything else. I was a good student, but I wasn't, A plus student. And but it was the Peace Corps experience that and that language ability that got me a fellowship to go on after returning from the Peace Corps to do a 2-year master's degree in Middle East Studies at Harvard University. And that's what really kind of got me into the field academically, because I then went on from Harvard and did a PhD at Princeton University. And from Princeton, I went back to Iran for another year on a Ford Foundation fellowship to do research work on my PhD thesis. And then came back, got a job at the Portland State University in Portland, Oregon, and the Middle East Studies Center there, where I taught Middle Eastern history, and also, as I mentioned earlier, half my teaching load was in Farsi, or Persian language, teaching the language, because I had been so immersed in it to begin with, and then had 6 years of graduate study of Farsi. So even though I was an historian and not a linguist per se, I had that ability, which has actually held me in good stead for the whole rest of my career. Not only in teaching, but also I ended up doing a good deal of consulting over the years. I did sort of cultural orientation seminars for businesses, and did a lot of on-contract translation work for the State Department. I was an on-contract escort interpreter for the State Department for a good many years, with the Immigration and Naturalization Service, and other government entities and private businesses. So did all that as well as teaching. Most of that work was done while I was in Portland, for where I was for 20 years. And then the call came, and this is actually number one question I'm asked is, well, how did you get to Portsmouth, Ohio? Good question, and that I really did not want to leave Portland, and that I and my family loved living in Portland. But it's a long story how that came about, but the bottom line is that there was an opportunity that very much fell in my lap to be in on the ground floor of helping build a brand new university in Portsmouth, Ohio, Shawnee State University, which had just been started in the late 80s, and I was essentially hired. It's a longer story than that, but the short version is that I was essentially hired to help create an international dimension to the university.
Mm.
And it was a particularly attractive opportunity at the time because in those days there was quite a lot of funding available thanks to Vern Reif. And it was a Speaker of the House in the Ohio legislature at the time, and quite a powerful individual. And this was his hometown area. So this was, partially a legacy project for him. But there was, quite a bit of funding available in the early years for the development of this new university. And it was a kind of a clean slate. That is, you weren't, coming into something that was already established. You were building from essentially scratch when it came from the international side of things. So that was kind of an attractive opportunity. So I came back to, and it just so happened this was in my hometown. I was born and raised in Portsmouth, Ohio, but left town. Yes, it did. But left town when I went off to college, and never thought I would look back. And then all these intervening years where I was gallivanting, around the world. Again, I spent a total of almost 6 years in the Middle East in a variety of capacities, because I did return to the Middle East again throughout my professional academic career as a Fulbright Hays scholar for a year to do research on my books and publications. And then more recently, in fact, only about 5 years or so ago, I actually took a group of Americans from around the country. There were 14 Americans from all different walks of life that I took on a cultural historical tour of Iran, in which we actually got a Volvo bus and traveled 2,000 kilometers all around the country. In Iran, is a very large country. It's the size of the United States east of the Mississippi. And we traversed about 2/3 of the country, visiting various historical and cultural sites, and then I lectured along the way, and also translated, and that was quite an interesting experience, and that was just a few years ago. So in any event, I've been back a number of times. In fact, that's been a huge part of my career, was travel. And I've done a great deal of travel around the world, not just to the Middle East, because when I came to Shawnee State and ended up first writing the strategic plan for what ended up being later the Center for International Programs and Activities at Shawnee State, which is sort of the primary organization or organizational entity responsible for international matters, including study abroad and everything related to the international field. And I became the founding director of that center called CIPA, Center for International Programs and Activities, and continued in that capacity, still continuing to teach as well for the duration of my career at Shawnee State.
So you did take so you did take some students, like say some international student groups?
Well, yes. In fact, that was one of the key aspects of our programming here was creating, which I was involved with, um, creating sister university relationships for exchange students. So, for instance, I was was involved in creating relationships with universities in Germany, in Spain, in Morocco, in China. In fact, two different universities in China, Vietnam, Chile. All these were sister universities, and it became a part of now the exchange of students, where we would send students from here to these schools, not all of them every year, but over time to these various sister universities, and they would send students to us. So that was very much a part of the programming. In addition, we would send individual students through various other international exchange programs to study abroad. So, and then I was heavily involved with recruiting international students. So when we started out, we had hardly any international students to speak of. And then gradually we started building and building until we got to a point where, as I used to joke with the president of the university at the time, that we had more countries represented at Shawnee State universities than we did states in the Union. As we ended up having over 20 countries represented by the time I left. So there was, a lot of activity. Also, sponsored through our programming internationally, professors to come in from, we had a professor from China, for instance, and other countries who came and lived in what we at the time was called the International House. Because in addition to my office at the university, we had through a donation been willed a house that for international purposes, and that became a very important part of our programming, including again having a place where we could attract international professors come in for a semester or for a year.
So they could stay in this home that.
So they could stay in the home, yes. And that made it sort of feasible financially, where since they had no housing costs, that, if that we generally would have them teach one or two courses, a term. And that would sort of give them enough to live on. And we actually, one professor visiting, international professor, actually wrote a book while he was, he'd taken a leave of absence from his home university, and he needed a place to where he could be pretty much left alone and write this book. And I was able to accommodate him thanks to that international house. And he did, in fact, write a book. We have an acknowledgement in the book, of course. So we also were involved a lot in terms of trying to reach out to the local community here in Southern Ohio with international programming of various sorts, including lectures and then various other activities on campus, including an international film festival, which was very popular actually over the years, where we would have a film from a foreign country, and then have someone, usually someone here on campus who was an expert in that particular country or area, give a sort of introduction to it and lead a discussion group afterwards. That was actually, as I said, quite popular.
I've been to a few of them, and I really enjoyed them.
Oh, okay, very good. So that was another thing that we sponsored. International Food Day. We introduced that. And then we worked cooperatively with various sort of local organizations as well, with Rotary, and which has an international dimension to it. And in fact, Rotary ended up giving us at Shawnee State University a scholarship for an international student to help us, again, increase our international presence on campus. And we did a lot of other interesting things relating to the sort of international field and area. There was an organization called Sister Cities that we worked with and cooperated with. And in fact, one of our exchange universities was a sister city of Portsmouth, in Zittau, Germany.
Oh, okay. I know there's a Mexican city, correct, for Portsmouth, sister city in Mexico?
Yes, Orizaba, Mexico. And we have had groups over the years come from Orizaba, but we never developed a sister university relationship with them. So in any event, that's really what I was pretty actively involved with. Also, one of the things I've highly encouraged and helped support through my office, the Center for International Programs and Activities, was I would give small scholarships to students to go abroad for short-term study. And various professors would organize a trip abroad for 10 days, 2 weeks, short term, and that would actually be a course that students would get credit for. So we ended up sending students through that program, which we help support, to a great many places, mostly to Europe, but to England, to Greece, multiple trips to Greece, and other countries. So that China, for instance, that was a very successful program, a very popular program, and introduced a lot of students, helping again increase the international sort of dimension of the university. So that's one of the things I'm most proud of in terms of my career is my work at Shawnee State University and helping sort of create and nurture this international programming at the university. But I since have moved on. Let me mention one other thing concerning travel. I mean, I did an awful lot of travel then developing these relationships for the university. So I feel very strongly that travel is important, or as Mark Twain said, travel is fatal to ignorance.
Teaches you a lot of things, right?
It does. It opens your eyes to a wider world. And
I agree.
We have a certain insularity here in Southern Ohio that so it's great to be able to contribute to opening eyes to wider worlds, and that's been actually one of the most sort of rewarding feedbacks for me is to students that I've sent abroad, for instance. Some students have never been outside of the county, and they were really afraid to take this sort of next step into a deep hole or into a black hole, so to speak. So I had to do a lot of encouraging and hand holding and talking to parents and all that to say, this is a good thing, and we're here to support them and help in any way we can. And it's very rewarding over the years to see these number of students who blossomed because of that experience.
It's an experience they can't take, they'll always have with them, and it just adds to
absolutely,
their
it's like
life.
opening a door and going through, and you can't go back. You're into a
You're
new
changed.
world. You're
Right.
changed. You're into a different world now. So yes, and to be a sort of facilitator of that has actually been very rewarding for me professionally.